Once again, thank you very much for agreeing to this conversation, Mr. Hodges. Let's start with the latest update. Today, I read in the news that the U.S. allies expect the administration of U.S. President Donald Trump to present a plan next week at the Munich Security Conference in Germany on how to end Russia's war against Ukraine, according to the news agency Bloomberg. And also Donald Trump's administration has planned meetings and discussions about ending the war in the Ukraine with several countries, including Ukraine, Russia, and others. What can we expect from this plan and these talks? And should Eastern Europe countries, for example, such as Poland and others, also be involved in these negotiations? What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a very important question with 3 or 4 different components to it. First of all, I don't know what to expect from the Trump administration's plan. We don't know exactly what it is. I've heard lots of bits and pieces about negotiations, about ceasefires, about what Ukraine should be willing to give up and that sort of thing. But I'm still not clear on what, for the U.S. administration, is their desired end state, other than stop the fighting. But of course, when you're talking about with Russia, that's not an end state. That Russia will only wait and then immediately violate whatever agreement they made. So I'm just not certain, and I don't have confidence yet that the Trump administration is prepared to do everything that's needed to ensure an enforcement of any agreement. That concerns me. And I'm also, frankly, very frustrated that the Trump administration has not talked about the importance of the Black Sea region, that Ukraine is not an island. It's part of a very important strategic region where we have NATO allies on the Black Sea and to the west of Ukraine as well. So the strategic thinking here, they're using Kremlin talking points about Ukraine should have to do elections. Okay, that's what the Kremlin wants, is to delegitimize Zelensky. So that concerns me, and I just don't have confidence where that's going yet. I hope that I'm completely wrong and that next week we'll hear a great plan. Now, the second part of an answer to your very good question is, who else? I mean, this is not the 18th century where, the 2 big countries get to divide up all the others. And so I cannot imagine President Zelensky, for example, just sitting at home waiting to hear what the outcome is and then having to deal with it. He won't do that. And I think most Ukrainians also would not accept that. Any sort of settlement in which Ukraine does not play the critical role. And then to the third part of your question, yes, the rest of Europe has an interest in how this goes. I can't imagine that European countries, particularly those in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Finland, Poland, Romania, and Germany, would just sit and wait to hear how it turns out, because anything other than a very, very positive outcome for Ukraine and a strong security guarantee or enforcement process is going to be bad news for Europe, because that means you're going to have millions more Ukrainian refugees pouring into Central and Western Europe, and Russia will just wait another year or 2 for us to lose interest, and then they'll resume what they're doing. I mean, we know, everybody in the world knows that. So I think, the Europe sovereign countries, as well as those who are members of the European Union, need to be thinking about, okay, we have a role here also.
Of course, absolutely agree with you. Moving to another aspect, the expansion of NATO with Finland and Sweden joining the alliance has raised important considerations for the security dynamics in the Baltic Sea region. And how does the addition of Finland and Sweden to the alliance affect the regional security of the Baltic Sea? What do you think about that?
Well, the enlargement, not expansion, but enlargement of NATO to include Sweden and Finland was important for several different reasons. Number one, the principle of enlargement that NATO chooses, and countries that want to join the alliance, they choose who joins the alliance, not Russia, not somebody else having a veto. So it was important that those two countries were added for that reason. And also to remind Russia that, if the alliance decides and if Ukraine wants to join, that it will be up to us, not Moscow, to determine whether or not Ukraine can join. Secondly, NATO got better the very day that Sweden and Finland joined, respectively. Both countries are strong, resilient, liberal democratic societies. Both countries have strong defense industry. Both countries have very capable professional military, as well as a reserve that can be quickly mobilized. Both countries have very good air forces and skilled naval capabilities that are ideal for the Baltic Sea, obviously. So we got better the very day. We've worked with Swedish and Finnish officers long before the country joined NATO. So I'm very confident about that. And then third, from a geostrategic standpoint, the geography obviously is much more to the advantage of NATO now, and that every country on the Baltic Sea, except for Russia, is a NATO country. So we should be able to develop better our ability to control the Baltic Sea, to maintain surveillance, to prevent damage to infrastructure, all these things that the Russians are trying to do right now. I think pretty soon we're going to be in a much better place in terms of control of the Baltic Sea, both on the surface, underneath the surface, and in the air. So the improved geostrategic setup for NATO in the Baltic region obviously got much better. And it also gives us more depth when we start talking about the Arctic, and as that becomes more and more competitive.
Yes, about the Baltic Sea and the defense of it, we will talk about a little bit further. But turning to a different topic, Trump reaffirmed his demand on I think, January 7th, urging NATO allies to increase defense contributions beyond the current 2% benchmark, and highlighting the need for Europe to take greater, if you can say that, responsibility for its security amid Russia's ongoing war in Ukraine. And Lithuania and Estonia actually have already become the first NATO members to meet Trump's call, raising defense spending to over 5% of GDP, as reported on January 27. And how important do you think it is to increase this defense budget? And how do you expect other NATO member states to respond? For example, I read that Germany at the moment are considering this Trump's call. So what do you think about this in common, and how do you think other NATO member states will act?
Well, of course, every nation is a sovereign nation, and it has to make its own decisions. But every nation that's in NATO, by joining the alliance, you fall under the Washington Treaty, which created NATO. And Article 3 of the Washington Treaty is where nations have the responsibility for their own defense and to also have the ability to go help others. So this 2%, 3%, 5%, the number is not in there, but the obligation is in there. And so it shouldn't be the American president, whoever it is, having to go around and kick everybody in the ass to do what they said they would do. Now, every president since Truman has complained that our European allies have not fulfilled their obligation. And that's a fact. Most European countries have failed to do this. And so I think that nations should do what they're supposed to do, not out of fear of getting scolded by the American president, but because they owe it as a member of the alliance and they owe it to the security of their own people. I mean, that's what this is about, is protecting your people. You can't put a sign on your border with Russia that says, "Hey, we spent 3% or 5%." That's not going to stop any BMPs or T-72s, T-80s. It's about having trained, ready, modernized forces, women and men prepared to fight, prepared to do their job as part of a NATO team, and also integrated with their strong, resilient societies. This all costs money. And so civilian leadership in each nation needs to explain to their population what the threat is, what the risk is, why we have to do it. Germany, it's impossible to understand. I mean, I do understand the politics enough of here in Germany, why there's challenges, but at the end of the day, it's about political will and priorities. And you can't I think Germany loses credibility in Europe if it's seen as hiding behind everybody else from a security standpoint. And I anticipate that things will change a little bit after the German elections here on 23 February. We'll have a different government, and we'll see. We'll see if that enables the German government to increase spending. But of course, they're not alone. I mean, UK is going through their strategic review. The size of the British Army right now, it cannot do what it's signed up to do. It can't do it. And so UK will have to make decisions about priorities. I mean, everybody would prefer to spend more money on social program, of course, highways, etc. But the fact is, the first duty of the government is to protect its people. And so you have to be clear-eyed about what the risks and the threats are. And I have to tell you, I live here in Europe, and I have not seen any drop off in the number of people going on ski holidays down in Switzerland or Austria or going to Mallorca. No drop off. Airports are full of people traveling. So, I'm not ready to start feeling sorry for any European country that's having trouble making the tough decisions. And you can be sure that Americans are looking at this, American voters. It's not just Trump, it's all Americans that are like, wait a minute, why are we spending over 3-4% with all of our responsibilities, which includes contributing to the protection of Europe, while Europeans in many countries are not willing to do that? That's a problem.
Absolutely, absolutely. So yeah, let's see how the other NATO member states will act, and especially interesting situation is in Germany, where elections is coming. So let's see what will happen after that. So, but going back a little bit in the Baltic Sea region and the threat from the Russia side, we know that parallel to the ongoing war in the Ukraine and the potential peace negotiations, we see that Russia is testing actually NATO member states through various methods, particularly in the Baltic Sea region. And for example, there have been acts of sabotage against the underwater infrastructure in the Baltic Sea, targeting countries in the region. And how would you comment on these actions? And what would you recommend as a response for both the Baltic Sea region countries themselves and NATO as a whole?
So I think that the Russians don't think of themselves as at war, not at war. I think for them, it's constant war of some sort. And it's just they use different weapons depending on what they want to do. On one extreme, of course, is the threat of nuclear war or invasion. And then at the other extreme is criminal activity, disinformation, disrupting our elections. And then in the middle, you start getting into sabotage, destruction of underwater infrastructure, uh, violation of sovereignty, violation of freedom of navigation, um, and also doing things like using ships that are not seaworthy, properly insured, or operating in compliance with international law to move oil to China and India, for example, or selling stolen wheat that they took from Ukraine, selling that to Egypt. So these are the kind of things that they do that we have to address. And I think what we saw about 3 weeks ago in Helsinki when President Stubb of Finland hosted all the heads of government and state of the Baltic nations, plus NATO Secretary General Rutte. They met to talk about um, these issues and what's going on. And they came up with a plan that had several solid measures, I think, about what they need to do. And this is not a court of law where you have to have absolute perfect proof of who did something. We shouldn't be so wrapped up about attribution because it's 99 times out of 100 it's not going to be an accident. That a ship drug its anchor for 100 kilometers. I mean, that's ridiculous. You'd have to be a terrible sailor to not realize you were dragging your anchor across the bottom of the Baltic Sea. So um, I think I saw this morning that Denmark has decided that they will begin to inspect vessels in the Baltic Sea. This is what I think every nation should be a part of this. These shadow fleet vessels, many of which are what the EU terms end of life vessels, meaning that they are on the verge of be creating a environmental disaster or some terrible accident at sea. And so it's appropriate and legal to seize vessels that appear to be not in compliance with international law. And I hope that other nations there in the Baltic Sea will support Denmark in doing this. This is part of how you deal with it. You have to the Russians have to suffer consequences for their aggression and for their illegal activity. If they don't, then they'll just keep pushing them, which is what they have always done.
Absolutely, absolutely. Additionally, we see that Russia's threats and testing manifest in other ways, such as sending drones across the border. For example, drone recently crossed into Latvia, and also the question is how should such actions be addressed, and what preventive measures can be taken in the future to stop this happening. And also the question, is it even entirely preventable according to these drones?
Yeah. So first of all, yes, of course it's preventable. If Russia feared that there would be some sort of consequences, then they would build in a buffer zone to make sure that you didn't have drones or missiles that got too close. But they fly over Romania, they fly over Poland, they fly over Latvia and other countries to avoid Ukrainian air defense to come in from different directions. Yeah, of course, there's always a possibility that you could have a malfunction, or maybe a drone was hit by Ukrainian air defense and it got off course. But those can be sorted out. The fact is, nobody believes that from Russia because of how they always violate the law, and they don't give a damn about airspace of other countries. And bad luck if a drone lands on the farmhouse of some poor Latvian farmers. So I think this is where nations and the alliance should lead the way, and the United States should be a part of it. But even if they don't, nations have the right and the responsibility to protect themselves and protect their airspace. And so I think, if you're in Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, and you see a drone that's approaching your airspace, you should be, number one, identifying it, and number two, shooting it down. Because you don't know, is that going to turn around and go back into Ukraine, or is it going to land inside your own country? And I think now it's easy for me to say, it's harder to do, and of course, heads of government are going to be judicious because they don't want to do something that gives the Russians an excuse to do something back. But I mean, if we were acting together to protect innocent life, I mean, it's what the U.S. and the Royal Navy do in the Red Sea. They're shooting down missiles in the Red Sea coming from the Houthis against international shipping. We did this with Israel. We helped knock down with the U.S., the Royal Air Force, the Jordanians, the French, and the Israelis, of course, to knock down Iranian missiles that were headed towards Israeli cities. We're shooting them down. Why are we so reluctant to do that with Russian missiles?
Yeah, that's a question. That's a question. I think that is also the good point, that we need to act together, because together we are the bigger strength. Yeah. And talking about some acts, what we are doing together, we can continue our discussion about the presence of NATO's and U.S. troops in the Baltics. And how would you assess the effectiveness of the NATO and U.S. troop presence in the Baltic states? For example, a few weeks ago, Lithuanian foreign minister stated that Lithuania actually would be willing to host more U.S. troops. Should such a request be responded to, and would it enhance the security of the Baltic states under the current circumstances?
Well, I think, first of all of your questions have 3 or 4 components. What Germany is going to have in Lithuania with the Brigada Litauen is going to be very good. I mean, this is going to be a very good, well-equipped, fully manned brigade that will be integrated into Lithuania's defense. That's a good, positive development. And I'd like to see that level of deployment by UK and Canada up in Estonia and Latvia as well, just like what the US has in Poland. So I like the fact that we have a US battalion that's in Lithuania, that we have helicopters flying out of Lielvarda, and that we're part of all the different operations up there. So that's a positive. But I would say I'm not sure that just adding more Americans is necessarily helpful. What's most important is the readiness of forces that are there. And if you have more troops, then you have training facilities. For example, if you're just up there as a garrison, then you're not really doing much. And so I think Lithuania probably is close to max capacity on what can train there over the course of the year. And then in Latvia, of course, and your excellent training area there in Latvia. Anyway, it'll come back to me in a minute. You got to have enough training area to be able to stay ready to fight. And if you have a bunch of troops there and you can't train, I don't know that that's the best solution. And then, of course, we still have not completed the famous Rail Baltica project. So why should the U.S. or any other country put more troops in there if those countries are not willing to finish a very important mobility project? I mean, I think that's a hard sell. I would not be in favor of it until I saw that we had the infrastructure in place that would allow rapid reinforcement. And of course, reinforcement is not going to come just through the Suwalki corridor up from Poland. It's also going to come from Finland, or from Sweden across the Baltic Sea. And so I'm also very interested in what we are doing in the alliance and in those countries to improve east-west transport corridors by land, by rail and highway. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, particularly from Norway to Sweden to Finland. And then finally, the people in Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania need to understand that they may have to fight for 2 weeks without additional reinforcement. So whatever's there is there, because it in a work, and of course I want to emphasize this is a worst case scenario where we got caught by surprise and the Russians were able to launch an attack of some sort. They were able to destroy reinforcement, transportation infrastructure. It might be 2 weeks before additional Polish, German, British, American troops showed up, coming through Suwalki or coming across the Baltic Sea. And our societies, are you ready to do that? Are the host nation forces, plus whatever's already there in the country, are they ready to do that? Do you have ammunition or people? Are you ready to do that? This is even more important than putting additional NATO troops in these countries, in my view.
Absolutely agree with you. Absolutely. And you just touched actually my next question and my next topic about the military infrastructure and this Rail Baltica project. So defense, of course, is unimaginable without infrastructure, and the Rail Baltica project is central to this. As the largest railway infrastructure project in the Baltic states, its goal is, of course, to connect Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia and the Western allies, which is crucial for the Baltic states' military mobility strategy and offering the best solutions transporting armored vehicles, for example, and other heavy military equipment to the region. However, the project has faced increasing controversies, delays, and also escalating costs, with high-ranking officials raising concerns that the railway may not be operational by the current official deadline of 2030, I think. Given that each country has a slightly different progress on the project, how would you assess its significance from the military defense perspective?
Well, of course, the reason it matters is needing rail that is the same gauge as the rest of Europe, so that you don't have to stop and go through this process of offloading or changing cars and rail gauges to fit the old Soviet gauge. So this is about speed. It's about how fast can you move things up in a pre-crisis scenario. When you're trying to convey to the Russians that we're prepared and we can move a lot of things quickly. This is an important part of deterrence. And I just don't, the fact that this has been going on for, I don't know, 10 years, it seems like, or more, that it's not finished is either it's a combination of mismanagement or lack of urgency or whatever. Now, I was in Riga back in the fall at the Riga Security Conference. And I heard somebody mention to me that, part of the holdup had been the building of the Riga main train station there, well, of course, a capital needs a big train station, but don't tie the progress of Rail Baltica to a new train station in Riga. You focus, I think the priority should be focusing on the military aspects of this rail project so that you can move rapidly all the way up to the north and to Estonia. Now, my sense is that other people know this and that they are eventually going to do it, but sense of urgency doesn't seem to be there.
You have already expressed your concerns about Rail Baltica project also last year in the mass media. And if we are comparing the progress at the moment, do you see any progress at the moment according to this project?
I don't know. I couldn't tell you. I will be in Vilnius though at the end of this month, and I will be looking to find out where we are.
Okay, okay. So at the moment, as far as I know, the Rail Baltica also are expecting some budget issues from the governments. So, but no one knows how it will end. So let's see. And in conclusion, a little bit different topic, more wider. I would be curious to know your thoughts on the potential new axis of evil, if we can say that. How viable, stable, long-term and strong could be the potential new axis of evil coalition between Russia, Iran, China, and North Korea be?
Well, I think it's important to have our eyes open and be realistic about the fact that they are working together somehow. Maybe not for where they're planning and coordinating their strategies. I don't know, but the fact is, Russia depends on North Korea, China, and Iran for ammunition, for troops, for electronic components, for drones, for missiles. Russia needs them. Iran has no other friend in the world than Russia. North Korea has no other friend in the world other than Russia. China looks at Russia as a junior partner, as a Tankstelle, a gas station, obviously, and they do care about being able to send ships over the north through the Arctic, and that only gets better with each passing year due to climate change. So I think from our standpoint, if we were thinking strategically, if you connected these four together and you think about how do you link them together in terms of strategic approach, then you begin to get a sense of the scale of what you need. Forces, industrial capacity, ammunition production, troops, ships, all the infrastructure, the ability to move between theaters. Okay, so think of that as one strategic whole. These are parts of one whole. And I think you can then develop a more strategic approach to uh, defeating these adversaries or potential adversaries. And the way I would look at it is if you defeat Russia first, help Ukraine defeat Russia first, then Iran becomes totally isolated, and they already are very weak. And with Russia having lost its ally in Syria, it's even more weak. So now you have a chance if you defeat Russia, Iran becomes totally isolated, and there's a chance to end the current Iranian regime as a source of terrorist attacks and support for terrorism and disruption in the Middle East. You defeat Russia first, and then North Korea is totally isolated. They have nobody to give them anything. And then China, of course, would be watching all this. And if they see that the West has the political will, the industrial capacity, and the military capability to help Ukraine defeat Russia first, isolate Iran, I think that's a very strong message of deterrence to Beijing. And when you combine the economic and military power of the United States, Canada, and NATO, it dwarfs Russia. I mean, it's ridiculous that we haven't already helped Ukraine wipe them out. So it really boils down to political will, and I will finish with this one historical example. In January 1942, there was no reason for optimism for the Allies. I mean, Great Britain was alone in Europe.
Yeah.
And the United States, most Americans had no desire to get into a conflict in Europe. And then the Japanese, of course, attack us in the Pacific, destroy our Pacific fleet at Pearl Harbor. So there was anger towards Japan, but not so much towards Germany. Roosevelt comes to Washington, and he and Churchill comes to Washington, and he and Roosevelt talk about this. And they come to the agreement in January of 1942. And there's no time, no reason that they had to defeat Nazi Germany first to keep Great Britain in the war, to allow the United States to build up and do what it had to do. And then they could turn to the Empire of Japan and defeat Japan. So here is optimism, but these two guys and these two countries realized they had to defeat Germany first. So now you've got strategic priority. And then 1 year later, in January 1943, at the Casablanca Conference, the UK, Great Britain, and the United States agree on end state of unconditional surrender. Not getting to a better negotiating position, unconditional surrender. And that was in January of 43. So only 1 year after Pearl Harbor. And now we've got priority, objective, and now Roosevelt is able to turn to the American people and say, look, this is what's at stake. We have got to do this. And he turned industry got on a war footing. The U.S. Army grew from being number 17 in the world to having 12 million people in uniform in a very quick amount of time. So this was political will, leadership, speaking to our citizens as if they were adults about what's at stake, and people got behind it. And that's what we need now. We need somebody to prioritize, talk about end state, and mobilize our industry and our population. And that's how you deal with these things.
It's a very good and very concrete example. So I think that we absolutely need to take into account also the lessons from the history, what we can. So I will say you a huge thanks for your detailed insights on the Ukraine war and the security issues in the Baltic States region. So I wish you success in your future activities, and absolutely let you know when the interview and the video clips will be published. So thank you very much for your time.
Okay, well, thanks for your patience, and thank you also for the privilege.
Thank you. Good luck. Bye.
Bye.